Today I will tell you about the week my daughter was married and how the joy of that celebration hid a truth I never expected to face. There are moments when silence becomes more powerful than words, when holding back is the only way to protect what matters. I thought a wedding would bring nothing but happiness. Instead, it revealed shadows I had been trying to ignore. A visitor came soon after holding something that could have torn my life apart. I chose not to speak, and in that choice, everything changed. What I learned in those days has shaped me into the woman I am now, and I want to share it with you. If you enjoy stories about family choices and the unexpected turns of life, remember to like, subscribe, and comment to follow more of my grandma life stories. My name is Hannah Sullivan, and my daughter's name is Emily. I raised her alone after losing my husband Richard 8 years ago. He was a man of great discipline, a researcher who devoted his life to building something that could outlast him. He left me with more than memories. He left a legacy that could either save or destroy depending on how it was handled. Emily grew up without knowing the details, and I kept it that way for her safety and for mine. On that sunny afternoon in Charleston, South Carolina, I watched her walk down the aisle in a white lace dress. She looked radiant with joy shining across her face, her steps light as if nothing in the world could touch her. My heart was heavy with both pride and worry. Pride because she had grown into such a graceful young woman. Worry because I knew what she could not yet see. The reception was as grand as any I had ever attended. Guests clinked glasses and whispered about how beautiful everything was. They praised Emily. They praised the choice of venue, the music, the food. They praised Daniel Mercer, her new husband, for his charm and presence. They did not know what I saw when I looked at him. Daniel stood tall in his navy suit, speaking with guests as if he had known them all his life. His laughter was loud and inviting, and his arm never strayed far from Emily's. But I could not stop staring at the gold watch on his wrist. It was the kind of watch that did not belong to a man running a struggling startup. The kind of watch that whispered questions no one else dared to ask. At one point, he stepped away. The smile left his face as quickly as he turned his back. I saw him slip toward the corner of the ballroom phone pressed tight to his ear. His voice dropped sharp and urgent. His hand gripped his tie as if it were choking him. No one noticed except me. I pretended to sip champagne my eyes, following him through the reflection in the tall glass window. When he returned, the mask was back. He raised his glass, gave a toast filled with charm, and everyone applauded. My daughter looked at him with the eyes of someone who believed every word. That was when I knew what kind of battle I would soon be fighting. Emily sat beside me for a brief moment that night. She held my hand and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Mom. I know this wedding is more than I could ever repay you." I smiled at her and squeezed her hand. I wanted to say so much more. I wanted to tell her that love is not proven by appearances, that joy can be fragile when built on false ground. But I stayed silent. Later, as the night slowed, I watched Daniel from across the room. He had returned to the dance floor, spinning Emily under the lights. His smile practiced his movements confident. Guests cheered and clapped. To them, he was the perfect groom. To me, he was a man hiding a shadow. I reminded myself of the promise I made long ago to Richard. He told me once, just months before his death, "Hannah, there will come a day when what I left you will be tested. Do not reveal it until you must. Silence will protect you." That night, under the glittering chandeliers of Charleston, I felt the weight of that promise more than ever. I could not have known that only days later, silence would become the shield that saved not only me, but also Emily. And I could not have known that the lawyer who arrived at my door would carry more than papers. He would carry the truth of Daniel's intentions and the danger my daughter could not yet see. That wedding day, for all its beauty, was not just a celebration of love. For me, it was the beginning of a trial. I did not yet understand how high the stakes would climb, but I knew as I watched Daniel slip that expensive watch back under his cuff that something was coming. something I had been preparing for all my life. And though the night ended with laughter and sparklers in the garden with Emily smiling brighter than the stars, I walked away with a certainty burning quietly inside me. The secret I carried, the $3 million no one knew about, was not only a gift from my husband, it was the only card left to play. That was the night I realized I was not just a mother giving away her daughter. I was a guardian standing on the edge of a storm, and my silence would decide whether we survived it. When the wedding ended and the last sparkler burned out, I returned alone to my wooden house in Asheville. The noise of Charleston still rang in my ears, but here the silence pressed in like a weight. On the mantel above the fireplace stood Richard's photograph, his steady eyes watching me as they always had. I set down my bag, looked straight at him, and whispered, "Richard, thank God you left me that secret fund, $3 million, hidden away in an account under a name Emily had never heard. Not a soul knew. Not my daughter, not her new husband, not the friends who congratulated me for raising a strong woman. That money was invisible, untouchable, yet it pulsed like a heartbeat beneath every decision I made. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the old oak table, and stared at the yellow light flickering from the kitchen lamp. I remembered how Richard used to sit across from me, explaining why secrecy was necessary. He warned me that money reveals true faces. "Hannah," he said once, "the day will come when silence will protect you more than any wall. Do not underestimate what people will do if they sense weakness." His words returned to me now with a clarity that burned. Emily had no idea. She thought her father had left nothing but debts cleared and a modest insurance policy. She thought the wedding I paid for came from years of savings and careful planning. She never asked, and I never told. Because once you reveal you hold $3 million, you are no longer a person. You become a target. I walked through the narrow hallway toward Richard's old study. The room smelled of cedar and old books. I sat at his desk, pulled out the locked ledger, and entered the code he had taught me before his last hospital stay. The screen flickered alive. There it was, the balance. $3 million sitting in quiet defiance of the world outside. I clenched my jaw. That fund was not meant for indulgence. It was a shield, a weapon, a lifeline. It was meant to protect Emily whether she realized it or not. Yet the irony stung. She had just married a man I did not trust, a man who carried shadows in his smile. Daniel would sense the existence of wealth. Men like him always did. As I sat there, I rehearsed the rules Richard had drilled into me. Never sign a paper without review. Never speak of the fund to anyone. And most of all, never let fear push you into revealing the whole truth. Secrets once exposed cannot be put back into the box. My phone buzzed with new wedding photos being shared in the family group chat. Emily was laughing in every picture. Daniel's hand rested on her waist, his grin flawless, rehearsed. I typed a reply. "Lovely, you both look radiant," and then set the phone down. My fingers tapped the table. I could not shake the unease. The next morning, I stood on the porch with my coffee and thought of everything Richard endured to build this. He had seen colleagues ruined when private research was leaked. He had seen families torn apart by greed. He had sworn his own family would not fall victim to the same hunger. That was why he created the account in secret, why he left it only to me. I heard his voice in memory. "If you ever doubt, choose silence. Silence will save you." Those words had felt cryptic when he was alive. Now, standing with the cup warming my hand, I finally understood. I decided then and there that no matter what Daniel or anyone else tried, I would never expose the full truth. I would protect Emily even if she turned against me for a while. My role was not to be liked. My role was to safeguard. I closed the laptop, locked the study, and drew a deep breath. The battle had not begun yet, but the pieces were already moving. Daniel's watch, his secret phone call, his too perfect smile. Those were not random details. They were signs of a storm gathering, and I would not walk into it unarmed. That night, I wrote Richard's name on a slip of paper and placed it under the ledger. It was my vow renewed. The $3 million would remain hidden, a shadow in my control. Not Emily's, not Daniel's, not the world's. Mine until the day it was truly needed. For years, I thought the legacy Richard left was simply money. But as I locked the drawer, I realized it was something greater. It was foresight, discipline, and the wisdom to remain silent even when tempted to speak. That silence would not only protect the inheritance, it would protect my daughter, and in the end, it would save my life. 3 days after the wedding, I was standing in my kitchen when a sharp knock rattled the front door. The sound cut through the quiet like a warning. I set down my cup and walked slowly to the entryway. On the other side of the glass stood a man in a fitted suit, briefcase in one hand, his expression polite, yet calculated. He introduced himself crisply. "Mrs. Sullivan, my name is Carter Doyle. I represent your son-in-law, Daniel Mercer, and your daughter, Emily." I studied him before opening the door fully. Young, confident, with that practiced smile lawyers wear when they think charm can replace trust. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. He walked into my living room as though it already belonged to him, placing the briefcase on the coffee table. Before he could open it, I asked, "Where is Daniel?" Almost on cue, Daniel appeared behind him, slipping in like a shadow that knew its timing. He carried the same smile from the wedding, wide and polished, but there was steel underneath it now. "We didn't want to burden you right away," Daniel began, easing into the armchair across from me. "But Mercer Innovations is facing temporary challenges. Nothing dramatic, just a gap before the next funding round. A bridge loan would keep us steady." I did not answer. I watched the way his fingers tapped against his knee, fast, impatient. He pressed forward. "You see, Hannah, this isn't just about us. It's about Emily, about her future. With just a little support from you, everything stays secure." Carter leaned forward, his voice smoother. "We have prepared documents for clarity. It is always best to formalize these family matters, especially with significant holdings in play." He unlocked the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, neatly clipped and notarized. I kept my hands folded. "What holdings?" I asked flatly. Daniel's smile tightened. "Well, Richard left behind more than memories, didn't he? Research unfinished projects. If we could commercialize even a small portion, it could change everything. It could rescue the company, create stability for Emily, and honor Richard's work." I felt a burn rise in my chest. He was not talking about stability. He was circling the fund and the files Richard had sworn must never be sold. My silence grew heavier, deliberate. Daniel slid the folder across the table toward me. On the front page in bold, it read, "Parental Estate Disclosure and Family Trust Agreement." My eyes caught the signature above the line waiting for mine. Emily's. Her handwriting rushed almost careless, as though she had signed without a second thought. I placed my fingertips on the edge of the folder, but did not pull it closer. "You had Emily sign this already?" I asked. My voice was low, but it carried. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his tone as though we were allies. "She trusts me, Hannah. She knows I am protecting her. And I want to protect you, too. These are just formalities, a way to align assets before any surprises catch us unprepared. It's family planning, nothing more." I met his eyes. Family planning or control. The mask cracked. Just for a second, his smile faltered, and I saw the hunger behind it. Carter quickly filled the silence. "This agreement is standard. It simply ensures transparency between generations. With your consent, all parties benefit." I pushed the folder back toward them. "I don't sign anything without my attorney. You should know that." Daniel laughed softly, but it was hollow. "Hannah, you make it sound like we are trying to trick you. This is about trust. Don't you want to see Emily safe, supported, cared for?" I rose from my chair, standing tall. Emily's safety does not depend on this paper, and if you believe otherwise, you don't know me at all. The room chilled. Carter gathered the folder with stiff fingers. Daniel stood his jaw clenched, though the smile returned to his lips. "Think about it," he said, straightening his jacket. "We'll be back from the honeymoon soon. It would be better to have this settled before then." I walked them to the door. As Carter stepped out, Daniel paused his hand on the frame. He lowered his voice. "Secrets have a way of coming out. Better to share them with family than let them become weapons." I held his stare. "Some secrets are protection. You'd be wise to remember that." The door shut and silence filled the house again, heavier than before. I leaned against the wood, my breath steady but sharp. Daniel had shown his hand earlier than I expected. He had Emily's signature, Carter's guidance, and the arrogance to assume I would fall in line. I walked back to Richard's study and opened the locked drawer. The ledger screen glowed in the dim light. $3 million, intact, untouched, mine to shield. My pulse steadied as I realized the truth. Daniel was not just probing. He was already moving, setting traps, and drawing Emily deeper under his influence. I whispered into the quiet. "You made your first move, Daniel. Now it's my turn." The decision hardened in me like stone. I would not be caught unprepared. I would not let Emily be consumed by his ambition. The folder he left behind was more than paper. It was a declaration of war, and Richard's legacy was the battlefield. That night, I locked the study, closed every curtain, and began making calls. If Daniel thought silence meant weakness, he had miscalculated. My silence was a blade, and when the time came, it would cut clean. When Daniel and Carter left my house that afternoon, the air felt heavier, as if they had carried some of their ambition and poison into my walls. I stood at the window until their car disappeared down the gravel road. My face remained calm, but my hands tightened at my sides. I knew Daniel was not finished. He had only tested my boundaries. He wanted to see how far I could be pushed. I turned away from the window and walked toward the study Richard had once guarded with his life. The door creaked when I opened it, releasing the smell of cedar and aged paper. Dust floated in the slant of afternoon light. This was where Richard had spent nights bent over research notes, where his pen carved equations and warnings onto sheets of paper no one else could interpret. The room felt frozen in time, untouched, since the last day he sat there. I sat down at his desk and reached for the locked drive he had shown me before his final trip to the hospital. My fingers trembled only for a second before I entered the code. The screen came alive, humming softly. I clicked through folders, each one named with cryptic numbers and abbreviations. Then my eyes stopped on one word that had haunted me for years. Keystone. The folder opened slowly as though reluctant to reveal its secrets. Inside were technical documents, models, and Richard's final notes. At the top of the first file, in bold letters, his handwriting scanned into the page. Extremely dangerous. Must be reported only to the International Security Alliance. Never to be commercialized. I read it twice, my stomach tightening. Richard had never been a man of exaggeration. If he wrote extremely dangerous, then it was not a warning to be ignored. He had spent decades working in cryptography building systems that shielded governments, corporations, and individuals from intrusion. Project Keystone was his final discovery, and now I understood why he hid it so carefully. The notes explained a flaw buried deep in a widely used encryption framework, something so fundamental that exploiting it could break into banks, medical systems, defense networks. It was not just valuable, it was a weapon. In the wrong hands, entire economies could collapse. I whispered into the quiet, "Richard, you knew they would come for this, didn't you?" I scrolled further and saw personal reflections he had left for me. "Hannah, if you ever open this, know that it was never meant to be sold. Money can blind good people and fuel the worst. Guard this as you would guard Emily. If someone offers you promises of wealth or security in exchange, remember their security means our destruction." I pressed my hand against the screen as if touching his handwriting could bring him back. My chest burned with both grief and fury. Daniel thought he could circle me with contracts and charm, But what he truly wanted was not my signature on a loan. He wanted Richard's work. I leaned back in the chair, breathing fast. My mind sharpened, no longer clouded by shock. This was no longer about a greedy son-in-law sniffing for money. This was about power and control. If Daniel ever discovered what Keystone truly was, he would not hesitate to sell it, even if it meant putting Emily in danger. The thought of my daughter signing papers under his influence made my jaw clench. Emily had no idea what she was tying herself to. She thought marriage meant trust, and trust meant surrender. She did not see that Daniel's hands were already reaching for what was not his. I locked the drive and shoved it back into the drawer, turning the key with force. The echo of the click reminded me of a prison door closing. That was how it had to remain, but I knew hiding was not enough. Daniel had already sensed something. His eyes had lingered too long on me when he mentioned Richard's research. His words had been too calculated. He was fishing, and sooner or later he would circle back. I stood up and looked around the study. Shelves stacked with books, notebooks filled with equations, diagrams pinned to corkboards. To Daniel, all of this would look like treasure. To me, it was a minefield. If he touched any of it, he would only ignite disaster. I spoke aloud, my voice cold and steady. "You will not win this, Daniel. You may fool Emily, but you will not fool me." My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Emily. "Mom, Daniel is worried about you. He says you seemed upset. Please don't stress yourself. We're fine and we'll be back soon." I stared at the screen, fury burning under my ribs. Daniel was already poisoning her against me, painting himself as the caring husband and me as the suspicious mother. The trap was being laid piece by piece. I typed back only 2 words, "I'm fine." Then I set the phone face down. I returned to the drive once more and copied a single file onto an encrypted stick. If Daniel forced his way into this house, he might find the decoy folders, but he would not find Keystone. Not unless I let him. For a long moment, I stood in the doorway of the study, my hand resting on the frame. Memories of Richard's voice echoed inside me, firm and resolute. "Silence will save you." I exhaled slowly, gathering strength. The silence was not weakness, it was preparation. I would hold my tongue while Daniel thought he was making progress. I would let him believe I was cautious, perhaps intimidated. And when the time came, I would show him just how dangerous silence can be. The night outside thickened as I locked the study door. I turned off the lights and walked down the hall, my steps sharp against the hardwood floor. Daniel had made his first attempt with contracts and charm. Now I understood what he truly sought. The battle ahead would not be fought with kindness or negotiation. It would be fought with strategy, with patience, and with the legacy Richard left in my hands. And I would not lose. The evening after I discovered Richard's warning in the Keystone folder, I knew I could not face what was coming alone. Daniel was clever, and Carter Doyle had already shown his sharpness. If I wanted to protect Emily and keep Richard's work out of their hands, I needed someone I could trust. There was only one name that made sense: Ben Carter. Ben was not family, but Richard had called him a brother. They had worked together for years in cybersecurity and digital forensics. After Richard's death, I had only seen Ben at the memorial, where he stood silently at the back eyes, sharp even in grief. He was not a man of small talk. He was a man of facts, data, and precision. I dialed his number, half expecting it to have changed, but when he answered, his voice was the same, steady and clipped. "Hannah, I didn't think you'd ever call me." "I wouldn't unless it was serious," I said. "And this is." There was a pause. Then his tone hardened. "Is it about Richard's work?" "Yes. It's starting. They're circling already. Daniel is moving faster than I thought." "I'll come tomorrow," he said. No hesitation. The next afternoon, Ben arrived at my house in Asheville. He stepped inside carrying only a small black backpack. His frame was lean, his hair more gray than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp as ever. He looked around the study with a mix of respect and sadness. He left you more than memories, didn't he? He left me a battlefield, I said. Daniel and his lawyer want a bridge loan. They brought papers had Emily sign without understanding. But I saw the way Daniel looked at Richard's research. He suspects something. Ben set down his backpack and opened his laptop. Then we make sure what he finds destroys his own trust in himself. We give him bait. I sat down across from him. Explain. We'll create a decoy. Not something ridiculous. If it looks worthless, he'll know it's fake. It has to look credible enough to tempt him, but disappointing enough that he wastes time chasing it. By the time he realizes, he'll have already revealed how far he's willing to go. I nodded, and in the meantime, the real keystone stays locked. Ben's fingers move fast on the keyboard, and the $3 million he asked without looking up. It stays hidden, I said firmly. It's my second shield. If Daniel believes that's all there is, it might keep him satisfied for long enough. But he cannot know both truths, the money and the research. He cannot know how deep this goes. Ben looked up at me. You're ready for war. I don't have the luxury of anything else, I answered. Hours passed as we built the trap. Ben took one of Richard's old patents, outdated and harmless, and dressed it with technical jargon to make it look modern. He buried it in a folder with a trail of notes, carefully designed to look like something valuable but unfinished. Anyone greedy will think they've found gold, Ben said, but any true expert will see it's nothing but dust. I leaned back in the chair. Daniel isn't an expert. He's a gambler. He'll chase anything that glitters. Ben closed the laptop and slid it toward me. Now you just need to make sure he hears enough to come sniffing. I smiled grimly. That won't be hard. He's already listening to everything Emily tells him. All I need to do is plant the right seed. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Ben studied me. You know what this means, don't you? He'll fight harder when he realizes you're not falling into line. I've been fighting since the day Richard died, I said. I just didn't know the enemy had my daughter's smile wrapped around his arm. Ben's eyes softened for a rare second. Hannah, you've always been sharper than people realize. Use that now. Let Daniel underestimate you. It's your greatest weapon. That night after Ben left, I sat by the window with the decoy drive resting in the desk. The crickets outside chirped against the dark, but my mind was awake, sharpened like a blade. I thought about Emily, about the way she looked at Daniel during the wedding, so trusting, so blinded by love. My heart ached, but I knew I could not save her by tearing Daniel away from her. I had to let him expose himself. I rehearsed what I would say when she called. Something casual, something careless. I've been trying to sort through your father's research, but the network here keeps failing. A throwaway line, innocent on the surface. To Emily, it would mean nothing. But to Daniel, listening, as he always did, it would be a siren call. I closed the curtains and locked the study. I placed Richard's photo face up on the table and whispered, "It begins now." Your friend Ben has set the stage. I'll protect your work. I'll protect our daughter, and I'll keep silent until silence cuts deepest. $3 million waited in a hidden account. Keystone sat locked behind layers of security, and on the desk lay a baited hook sharp enough to tear away Daniel's mask. The day after Ben and I built the decoy, I sat at Richard's old desk, staring at the flickering monitor. The false file waited there, carefully wrapped in technical jargon, polished enough to sparkle for a man like Daniel, but hollow enough to collapse under scrutiny. It was bait invisible to Emily, invisible to anyone except the predator already circling. Ben had been clear. Leave it in a place he can reach, but not too easily. Make him believe he outsmarted you. That's when he'll reveal how far he's willing to go. So I moved the file into a less secure section of the system, a directory connected to the house network. I adjusted permissions just enough that someone watching closely would find the door cracked open. Then I sat back waiting. That evening, Emily called. Her voice was warm, still carrying the glow of her honeymoon. "Mom, how are you holding up? You've been quiet." I made my voice sound weary, distracted. I've been going through some of your father's old papers trying to make sense of them. The problem is, this old network keeps failing on me. Half the time I can't even open a file without it freezing. Silence on the other end for a breath too long. Then Emily laughed lightly. Daniel's good with those things. He could take a look. Of course he could. I had just sounded the bell. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel himself. Emily told me you're having issues with your system. I'd be happy to help. I can install a quick diagnostic. It'll stabilize everything for you. I stared at the message, the corners of my mouth tightening. Diagnostic. That was the word people like him used to disguise intrusion. Still, I replied, "Fine, come tomorrow." The next day, Daniel arrived with his laptop in hand. He smiled as he walked in his tone casual. "I just want to make things easier for you, Hannah. Emily worries when you struggle with technology." I watched his every movement as he sat at the desk, connecting cables, fingers tapping commands. His voice filled the silence. "This software will monitor your system performance. Nothing complicated. It'll even alert me if something goes wrong so I can fix it remotely." I folded my arms. "So you'll have access from anywhere." He didn't flinch. "Temporary access, strictly to help. You can trust me." Trust. The word tasted like ash. I let him finish, let him click through his installation windows, let him believe he was planting his parasite unseen. My silence was not consent, it was the rope he was weaving around his own neck. After he left, I called Ben. "It's done. He's in." Ben's voice sharpened. "Good. Now we watch. His keylogger will grab what you let him see, and when he thinks he's clever enough to take it, we'll know." That night, I moved through the house with a different rhythm. The study was no longer just Richard's sanctuary, it was a battlefield. The glowing monitor felt like a spotlight in a darkened stage. Somewhere on the other end of a connection, Daniel was waiting, watching, certain he had control. I placed the decoy file front and center, labeled just enough to spark curiosity. Legacy or encryption. Notes. Then I opened it, typed a few meaningless keystrokes, and closed it again as though it were too heavy to deal with. Hours later, Ben called back. He tried to open it already. The spyware reported activity. He's impatient. A chill ran down my spine, but my voice stayed calm. Good. Let him be impatient. The more eager he is, the faster he falls. The following day, Emily stopped by. She wandered through the kitchen, smiling, trying to mask her concern. "Daniel said your system is much better now. He really wants you to feel comfortable, Mom." I gave her a small smile. "It's fine. Files still act strange sometimes, but I'll manage." She touched my arm. "He's trying, you know. He wants us to feel like a family." I looked at her, my daughter, so blinded by affection, she could not see the shadow growing at her side. My heart clenched, but I said nothing. Words would only push her further into his arms. After she left, I locked the study again. The air felt charged, like a storm gathering outside. I knew Daniel was not finished. Installing spyware was only step one. He would want proof, a taste of treasure. And when he touched what I placed before him, when he reached for it with greedy fingers, that's when he would expose his hand completely. I whispered into the dim light, more to Richard's memory than to myself, "The trap is set." Now we wait. For the first time in days, I felt something close to control. Silence had not been weakness. Silence had been the invisible snare tightening around Daniel's pride. He thought he had gained access to my world, but in truth, he had stepped directly into the cage I built. And when the door closed, there would be no escape. Daniel did not waste time. Through the access he had planted in my system, he found the bait, our decoy file carefully designed to look legitimate. I could almost picture the hunger in his eyes as he clicked through the folder. But he wasn't acting alone. Carter Doyle sat with him reviewing the material line by line. "This isn't what it looks like," Carter said eventually, his brow furrowing. "Too many inconsistencies. The math is dressed up, but the foundation is thin. If this were real, it wouldn't be here unprotected." Daniel leaned back, frowning. "She's testing me," he muttered. "Hannah wants to make me prove myself as if I were some stranger sniffing around her family. She planted this on purpose." Carter closed the folder and tapped his pen against the table. "Maybe she's smarter than you think. If she set this trap, she wants to see what you'll do with it. I'd advise you to step back." But Daniel shook his head. His pride was too heavy, his ambition too sharp. "No, I'll turn it to my advantage. Emily will hear it from me, not her. She needs to know that her mother doesn't trust me, that Hannah is dividing us before we even have a chance to stand as a family." And so he carried the script straight to my daughter. Later that night, Emily arrived at my house, her voice already tight, her face flushed. "Mom, why would you do that?" Daniel told me. "You left him some useless file to prove he isn't worthy. Why would you humiliate him like that?" I kept my voice steady. "Emily, that file was not meant for him. It wasn't his to take in the first place." Her hands balled into fists. "You always think the worst of him. Every word he says, you twist. He told me he shouldn't have looked at it, but he did it because he wanted to help the company to help me. And now you've turned it into a weapon against him." The heat in her words cut deeper than any insult Daniel could have thrown at me. I forced myself to stay calm. "Emily, listen carefully. Men who want power will use love as their shield. He's using your trust to excuse his intrusion. That isn't help, that's control." She shook her head, tears forming. "You don't understand. You never trusted my choices. You've been doubting him since the first day we met. Mom, I'm tired. I'm tired of you treating me like I don't know how to live my own life." Her words echoed in the room, sharper than glass. She turned away, her shoulders stiff, her voice breaking. "You think you're protecting me, but all I see is a mother trying to tear down my marriage." I stood frozen, the silence pressing against me like stone. I wanted to reach out to shake her free from Daniel's shadow, but I knew that pushing harder would only drive her deeper into his arms. When the door slammed behind her, the house fell into a crushing quiet. I sank into Richard's chair, staring at the dim screen of the computer, still humming on the desk. The bait had worked, but not the way I had hoped. Daniel had twisted it into proof that I was the enemy. And Emily, my daughter, my blood believed him. I clenched my fists, forcing the despair back down. This was not the time to break. Richard had warned me, money reveals faces. Now I saw the truth of his words. Daniel's face was clear, hungry, and manipulative, and Emily's face, bright, trusting, was clouded by the storm he had pulled her into. I whispered to myself, the sound cold in the empty room. "You want a war, Daniel? You'll have it. But I will not fight you with anger. I will fight you with truth. And when Emily finally sees you for what you are, she will know I stood my ground." I rose, walked to the window, and stared out into the night. The stars were sharp against the darkness, silent witnesses to the battle unfolding. My chest ached with the weight of Emily's words, but beneath the ache, steel hardened. He thought he had turned her against me. He thought he had broken the bond between mother and daughter, but all he had done was reveal his desperation, and desperate men always slip. In that moment, I promised myself I would not falter. I would let Daniel play his games, twist his stories, poison Emily's trust, and I would wait silent and steady until the day came when his lies collapsed under their own weight. Because the truth has patience, and so do I. Emily had left my house furious, but fury fades and doubt lingers. I knew it would only be a matter of time before the cracks began to show in her marriage, and soon enough they did. At first they were small. She told me in passing during a phone call, her voice hesitant as if she was trying to convince herself more than me. "Daniel's been working late, Mom. The company's going through a rough patch. He's under pressure." I said nothing, just listened. But Emily noticed things she couldn't ignore. Daniel cleared his browsing history every night, sometimes twice. He kept his laptop close, never leaving it unattended, even when he went to make coffee or answer the door. And when Emily asked what he was working on, his tone sharpened defensive, as if a simple question were an interrogation. Then came the finances. Emily had access to some of the company records. She noticed the R&D budget ballooning without explanation. He said it's new projects, she told me once, her voice faltering, but there are no new products. Nothing to show for it. The unease grew heavier. At night, Daniel stepped out to take phone calls, whispering in the hallway or pacing in the kitchen with his back turned. Emily heard pieces that cut into her trust like shards of glass. One night, she couldn't sleep. She stepped quietly into the living room barefoot and heard his voice low and urgent. "I'll have the rights within 2 weeks. The contract must stay hidden. No one can trace it back. Do you understand?" Not her. Not anyone. Emily froze. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. She wanted to believe he was talking about something ordinary, something harmless. But the secrecy was too sharp, the words too precise. When Daniel ended the call, he turned to find her standing there. His smile flashed, practiced and quick. "You're still awake." She swallowed. "Who are you talking to? Just a supplier. Nothing important." His answer came too fast, his tone too smooth. He slipped the phone into his pocket as though burying the truth. Emily stared at him. "Suppliers don't care about contracts being traced. What's really going on?" He stepped closer, cupping her cheek, his charm switching on like a light. "You're tired, Emily. You've been under stress too. Don't let little things eat away at us. I'm building something for us, for our future. Trust me." But trust once fractured doesn't mend with words. The next morning, Emily searched through the office files while Daniel showered. She didn't find anything clear, but she saw patterns, sudden transfers, payments routed through shell accounts, invoices marked confidential. None of it matched the explanations Daniel had given her. When she confronted him again that evening, he raised his voice for the first time since they married. "Do you think running a company is clean and easy? Do you think every decision can be explained to someone who doesn't understand business? Stop questioning me, Emily. Either you're with me or you're against me." Her breath caught. She had never heard him speak that way. The warmth was gone, replaced with ice. Later, she sat alone on the balcony staring at the streetlights below. In her mind, my warnings replayed. Men who want power will use love as their shield. He's using your trust to excuse his intrusion. At the time, she thought I was paranoid bitter. Now those words pressed into her like a weight. Still, she wasn't ready to admit it. She wanted to believe in him, to believe her marriage wasn't already cracking. But every whisper in the night, every closed laptop, every evasive answer carved the fracture deeper. For me, the silence on Emily's end was its own message. Days passed without her calling, and when she finally did, her tone was clipped. "Mom, Daniel's been stressed. I think we just need space. Don't make things worse." I listened steady, not pushing. Because I knew the truth, the more Daniel tried to hide, the more visible his shadow became. And Emily, my daughter, who once defended him against every word I spoke, was beginning to see it for herself. I sat in my study that night, Richard's photo on the desk, the decoy file glowing faintly on the screen. Daniel thought he was closing in, but he was unraveling. The more desperate his whispers grew, the closer Emily came to seeing the man he truly was. I whispered to Richard's memory, "The cracks are showing. She doesn't trust me yet, but soon she won't trust him either. And when that moment comes, I'll be ready." Daniel believed he could manage perception control, the narrative bend Emily to his will. But love blinded him to the one truth he could never escape. Lies may hold for a season, but cracks always spread, and eventually the whole structure collapses. Emily was beginning to hear those cracks, and Daniel didn't even realize the sound was deafening. The night the truth broke open did not come with shouting or slammed doors. It came in silence. Emily stayed late at Mercer Innovations, walking the hallways after the staff had gone home. The hum of the fluorescent lights echoed against the glass walls, and the click of her heels was the only sound in the empty corridors. She carried Daniel's spare office key in her hand, her fingers tight around it. She told herself she only wanted to reassure her doubts, but deep down, she already knew what she was about to find. Inside Daniel's office, the glow of his computer pulsed faintly. He had left it on as if daring someone to look. Emily closed the door softly behind her and sat at his desk. Her hands shook as she moved the mouse, the screen springing awake. At first, it was ordinary spreadsheets, project outlines, emails. But then she noticed the encrypted folders at the bottom of the desktop disguised with bland names like Quarterly Review and Client Notes. She hesitated, then clicked. The password screen blinked at her. She tried their wedding date. The folder opened. Inside, the truth revealed itself with brutal clarity. Financial statements with inflated numbers, accounts drained and rerouted through Shell Corporation's invoices, marked consulting with amounts far beyond anything legitimate. And then the files that froze her breath. Technical documents, research notes from Richard altered and repackaged, attached to outgoing emails. Emily scrolled further, her pulse pounding in her ears. Transfer logs showed massive data packets already in motion, streaming out of the Mercer servers into an overseas address. She clicked on the server's registration. The name of the corporation appeared, one she recognized from whispered conversations at investor dinners. A multinational giant known for hostile acquisitions. She whispered to herself, her voice trembling, "Oh my God, Daniel." The reality crashed over her like cold water. He wasn't just hiding secrets from her mother. He wasn't just manipulating trust at home. He was selling everything: her father's stolen work, the company's remaining assets, the future she thought they were building together. The clock in the corner of the screen ticked past midnight. She watched as the progress bar on one of the transfers crept forward, 68%, 69, 70. Evidence of betrayal measured in real time. Her throat tightened. For the first time, she couldn't defend him. Every word Hannah had spoken, every warning she had dismissed, came back sharp and undeniable. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was treachery. Emily copied the files onto a flash drive she found in the drawer. Her hands moved quickly, decisively, even as her chest heaved with panic. The whir of the computer fan filled the room as though the machine itself knew it was being gutted. When the copy completed, she yanked the drive free and slipped it into her purse. She glanced one last time at the transfer logs, 82%. By the time Daniel returned tomorrow, the data would already be gone, and Mercer Innovations would belong to someone else. She stood gripping the back of the chair, steadying herself. In the glass reflection, she saw her own face, eyes wide, lips pale. Not the face of a bride glowing with love, the face of a woman who had just uncovered that her husband had betrayed her, her family, and the very foundation of trust between them. She turned off the monitor, plunged the room into darkness, and stepped out into the silent hallway. Each step echoed like a verdict. When she reached her car, she sat for a long moment, gripping the wheel. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel, working late. "Don't wait up. I love you." Her hand trembled, but she did not reply. The phone screen went dark, and in that darkness she understood. Daniel hadn't just lied to her. He had chosen his path, and it led away from her, away from loyalty, away from everything her father had built. I didn't know the details then, but when Emily finally came to me with the flash drive, her eyes said it all. She had seen the truth with her own eyes. Daniel had exposed himself, and there was no turning back. Emily returned to Asheville without warning. I was in the kitchen, the evening light falling across the wooden table where I had shared countless meals with Richard when I heard the sound of her car door close outside. A moment later, she stepped in. Her eyes were red from sleeplessness, but her face was set like stone. She didn't greet me, didn't speak. Instead, she placed her laptop on the kitchen table and slid it toward me. The screen glowed with a list of files. I saw financial statements, encrypted transfers, and server addresses that weren't American. At the bottom, the Mercer Innovations seal sat like a mockery of legitimacy. Emily didn't explain. She didn't need to. I looked at her, then back to the screen. My voice was calm, measured. "I need you to stand with me now." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. No apology, no excuses, just silent acknowledgement of the truth. I pulled out a chair. We sat together in the glow of the laptop, the kitchen quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Emily's fingers hovered above the trackpad, hesitant. I reached for her hand. "Show me everything." One by one, the pieces came into focus. Daniel's fabricated budgets, money bleeding out of Mercer Innovations into shell companies, technical documents, some drawn straight from Richard's archives, altered and attached to emails bound for servers overseas. The logs were there, undeniable. Dates, times, IP addresses. Ben arrived 20 minutes later, summoned with a single call. He walked in his laptop under his arm and took a seat without ceremony. "Let's see what he's done." Emily pushed the laptop toward him. Ben's fingers flew across the keyboard, his eyes narrowing as he read. Encrypted channels, foreign servers. He's not hiding these from amateurs. He's hiding them from regulators. Whoever's paying him is preparing for a takeover. Emily whispered, "He said it was for us. For our future." Ben didn't look up. "This isn't for anyone's future. It's theft, and it's deliberate." I leaned forward. The money, the research, the trust fund he tried to push through Emily, he's not just stealing from me. He's selling everything he can touch. Mercer Innovations is nothing more than a carcass to him. Ben clicked again and brought up a folder marked Keystone Legacy. The decoy Richard and I had placed wasn't here. This was Daniel's copy evidence that he had taken the bait, believing he'd found something worth selling. "He already passed this file along," Ben said. "They'll realize soon it's worthless. That's when they'll demand more." I nodded slowly. "And when they demand more, he'll come back to us." The three of us sat in silence for a moment. Emily stared at the table, her face pale. She finally spoke, her voice small. "He looked me in the eye and told me I was imagining things, that I was paranoid just like you, Mom." I placed my hand on hers. "He's been manipulating you since the day you said yes to him. Don't let shame blind you. This isn't your failure." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she turned back to the laptop, her jaw hardening. "Then let's finish what he started. Let's build the full case." Ben gave a short nod. "We have enough already, but the stronger the chain, the harder it is for him to break free." So we worked through the night. The three of us gathered around the kitchen table like soldiers mapping a battlefield. Every file, every transfer, every signature, Ben linked them together, building a timeline of betrayal. We traced the money to its foreign destination, tied the stolen research to Daniel's login credentials, connected the spyware he had installed on my system to the very moment he tried to access the decoy file. I opened another folder on my own machine and revealed the ledger with the $3 million Richard had left me. Ben's eyes flicked up. "He's circling that too, isn't he?" "Yes," I said. The inheritance was always his secondary goal. Control of Emily was his key to unlocking it. Emily's hand tightened around the edge of the table. "He doesn't get to touch it. Not 1 cent. I met her gaze. "No, he doesn't. But you need to understand he'll try, and he'll try again until we stop him." The clock ticked past midnight. Coffee sat cooling in our cups, forgotten. The weight of betrayal pressed on Emily's shoulders. But I saw something else forming there too. Resolve. When the files were all gathered, when the web of deceit was clear enough that even Daniel could not deny it, Ben leaned back. "We have everything we need. But we can't rush this. If we move too soon, he'll spin it as paranoia, a family feud. We wait until he crosses the line in public. Then we strike. I close the laptop, the sound echoing in the kitchen. Then that's what we'll do." Emily finally looked at me fully, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I'll stand with you, Mom, no matter what it takes." I pulled her into an embrace, not gentle but firm, the kind of embrace built on steel rather than sentiment. "Then we'll win. Not with anger, not with noise, with truth." That night, as the kitchen lights dimmed and the files sat secure in Ben's drives, I knew the battle had shifted. Daniel believed he had divided us. He believed Emily was still under his spell. But here in the quiet heart of our home, mother and daughter stood united. The trap was no longer mine alone. It belonged to all of us. And Daniel had no idea how close the walls were to closing in. The kitchen was quiet except for the steady clicking of Ben's keyboard. Emily sat across from him, her arms folded, her face pale from everything we had pieced together. I poured coffee that none of us touched. The air was too heavy. Ben finally stopped typing. "I've got something," he said. His voice carried a sharp edge, the kind of tone that made the room lean in. He turned the screen toward us. Footage from the wedding reception. Someone posted it on a private social account. It hasn't been deleted. I leaned forward. The video was grainy, filmed from across the reception hall. The camera shook as laughter filled the background. In the center of the frame was Daniel, glass in hand, surrounded by his friends. His tie was loosened, his grin wide, his posture loose with arrogance. We watched as one of his friends nudged him. The audio was faint but clear enough. A voice asked, "So what's next, man? You married rich already." Daniel lifted his glass higher, smirking. "Not rich yet," he said, his voice dripping with confidence. "But just give me 1 month. 1 month, and you'll see." The group roared with laughter. The camera shook again as someone clapped him on the back. Daniel tipped his head, savoring the attention, the words echoing like a promise he fully believed. Emily's breath caught. She stared at the screen, her eyes filling. The reflection of her husband's smiling face lit her pupils. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then her hand rose slowly, covering her mouth. I spoke first, my tone even but cold. "There it is. Pride doesn't hide well." Ben hit pause, freezing. Daniel's smug expression in the middle of the frame. He thought no one would remember. But arrogance always leaves a record. Emily whispered, her voice breaking. He was already planning it. From the very beginning, even on our wedding day. Her shoulders shook, but she didn't cry loudly. The sound was soft or hollow, as though the truth had cracked something deep inside her. I reached across the table, laying my hand over hers. Better to see him clearly now than to live blind to it for years. Emily shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "I defended him, Mom. I fought you for him. And all along he was laughing behind my back." "Not behind your back," I corrected gently. "Right in front of you. That's who he is. He never thought you'd question it." Ben leaned back, folding his arms. "This clip is gold. Combined with the transfers, the files, the spyware, this is the piece that destroys his denials. You can argue over data, over financials, but words spoken in his own voice. That's indisputable." Emily wiped her eyes, but her gaze stayed fixed on the frozen image of Daniel. She whispered again, as if confessing to herself, "I thought he loved me. I thought I was enough." I squeezed her hand tighter. "You are enough. His hunger has nothing to do with you. Men like him only see what they can take, but now you see it too." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of anger, of grief, of something shifting between us. Emily was no longer standing in his shadow. She was beginning to stand beside me. Ben cleared his throat. "We'll package this. The financials, the stolen data, and now his own admission. He can't spin this away. Not in a court, not in the press." Emily drew in a shaky breath, nodding. Her eyes still glistened, but the tears had stopped falling. There was steel forming under the pain. She closed the laptop slowly, as though sealing Daniel's fate with her own hands. I looked at her, my voice firm. "This is your choice too now, not just mine. Will you stand with me?" Her answer was quiet but steady. "Yes." In that moment, the air in the kitchen changed. Emily was no longer the daughter torn between love and suspicion. She was a woman who had witnessed betrayal with her own eyes. The video had burned away the last of her doubts. We sat in silence, the laptop resting closed on the table, like a loaded weapon. The night pressed in around the house, but inside, a new resolve had taken root. Daniel thought he had split us apart. He had no idea he had just united us stronger than ever. The cafe was tucked behind rows of trimmed hedges and climbing roses, the kind of place where silence felt cultivated, not accidental. I had chosen it deliberately. No noise, no distractions, just a garden cafe where every word carried weight. I arrived first and chose a table near the koi pond, the sound of running water masking private conversations. Ben sat 2 tables away, dressed plainly, pretending to read a newspaper. He was not here as my ally, not openly. He was here as a witness. Minutes later, Emily walked in with Daniel at her side. He looked polished as always, powder blue suit, silver watch, his smile rehearsed. And trailing behind him with a leather case in hand was Carter Doyle. The lawyer's expression was calm, but his eyes darted with calculation. They thought they were walking into a negotiation. They thought the ground belonged to them. I stood to greet my daughter, first pressing a kiss to her cheek. She tried to smile, but her eyes were wary, flickering between me and Daniel. Then I extended my hand to Daniel. He shook it with practiced warmth. "Hannah," he said smoothly, "thank you for agreeing to this. We just want what's best for everyone." I gestured for them to sit. The waiter brought coffee and left us to ourselves. Carter set his case on the chair beside him, folding his hands on the table. "Shall we begin?" I smiled, calm and deliberate. "Yes. Let's begin." From my bag, I pulled a slim folder and laid it flat on the table. The paper inside was crisp, notarized, official. I pushed it toward Daniel with 2 fingers. "This," I said evenly, "is my inheritance disclosure, the complete record of what I received after Richard's death." Daniel's hand hesitated before he took it. He slid the paper from the folder and scanned it quickly. The number $240,000 stared back at him in black ink. For a moment, his face betrayed nothing. He smiled politely, leaned back in his chair, and set the paper down as though it were trivial. But I saw it. A flicker, a tightening of the jaw, the shadow that passed through his eyes before the mask returned. Emily leaned forward, confused. "That's all?" she asked softly. I met her gaze. "That's what remained after debts, after expenses, after everything we fought through. It isn't much, but it's enough for me to live quietly." Daniel gave a short laugh, light but strained. "Of course. Modesty is admirable. But surely, Hannah, you don't expect us to believe this is all Richard was brilliant. His research alone was worth millions." Carter cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take time to verify. It's always best to ensure transparency before making assumptions." I folded my hands on the table. "Transparency is exactly what I'm giving you. Every dollar accounted for. If you choose not to believe it, that's your burden, not mine." Daniel's smile thinned. He tapped the folder with 1 finger, his voice tightening. $240,000 isn't enough to sustain Mercer Innovations. Not enough to protect Emily's future. You could do more if you wanted. Or I replied, my tone sharp enough to cut I could do nothing, and that would still be more than you deserve. The silence that followed was heavy. Emily shifted in her chair, her eyes flicking between us. "Daniel," she whispered, "just leave it. If that's what Mom has, then." He snapped too quickly. "Emily, you don't understand. This isn't about greed. This is about survival. If we don't secure more funding, the company collapses." I watched him carefully. "So you admit this was never about family, never about trust. It was about bleeding every resource dry to save a company already drowning." Carter's jaw tightened, but he kept silent. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice, his mask cracking at the edges. "You think you can play games with me, Hannah? You think I don't see what you're doing?" I met his glare without flinching. "You're already in the game, Daniel. You walked into it the moment you tried to control Emily with contracts she didn't understand. You walked into it when you planted spyware in my home. and you sealed yourself in when you reached for something that was never yours." Emily froze, her eyes wide. "Spyware, Daniel? What is she talking about?" Daniel turned to her, too fast, too defensive. "She's twisting everything. She set me up. She wants you to believe I'm some kind of thief." But Emily's face said it all. She had heard enough lies already. I leaned back, letting the silence work. Daniel thought he had come with strength, with a lawyer at his side, with contracts in his case. But here in this quiet cafe, it was just him against the truth. And the truth was already gnawing at the edges of his control. Finally, I stood sliding my chair back. "This is the only disclosure you'll ever get from me. Believe it or don't. But understand this silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon." Daniel's hand tightened around the folder. His eyes were dark now, the pretense gone. For the first time, he realized the ground beneath him was not his. And in that instant, I knew the trap had closed. The boardroom gleamed with glass and steel, the kind of place built for $1,000,000 signatures and handshakes, sealed with pride. Daniel sat at the head of the long, polished table. Carter Doyle to his right, their confidence painted across their faces. Around them, the executives of the acquiring corporation shuffled their papers, pens lined up neatly, contracts spread like a promise of victory. Daniel smirked, leaning back in his chair, as if the deal was already his. "Gentlemen, once we finalize this acquisition, Mercer Innovations will rise stronger than ever." The chairman across the table gave a polite nod. "We're prepared to move forward. All that remains are the signatures." Carter opened his case with practiced ease, sliding the contracts out like cards from a magician's hand. "Everything is in order," he said smoothly. The tension in the room wasn't doubt, it was anticipation. Millions hung in the balance. Daniel's pulse raced with triumph. He had convinced himself that no one could touch him now. But arrogance always forgets how quickly the tide can turn. Just as the chairman reached for his pen, the first phone buzzed, then another and another. Within seconds, the room was vibrating with the chorus of alerts. Executives frowned, glancing down at their screens. A murmur rose. The chairman's brows knitted as he scrolled. Then his lips parted in disbelief. He looked up at Daniel, his tone sharp. "Is this true?" Daniel blinked his smile, faltering. "What are you talking about?" One of the board members read aloud, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Breaking news, CEO Daniel Mercer under federal investigation for financial fraud and unauthorized sale of intellectual property." The words landed like a thunderclap. Daniel laughed weakly, raising his hands. "That's absurd. A smear campaign. Someone's trying to sabotage me." But Carter's face had gone pale. His phone buzzed again. Another headline, another confirmation. SEC reviewing Mercer Innovations transfers. FBI sources confirm inquiry into espionage allegations. The executives' chairs scraped back as they stood, their eyes cold, their pens forgotten. The chairman closed the folder in front of him with deliberate precision. "This meeting is over." Daniel's voice cracked. "Wait, listen to me. These accusations are false. You can't walk away over rumors." The chairman adjusted his cufflinks, his tone final. "We don't invest in men whose names are splashed across headlines for crimes. Good day, Mr. Mercer." The room emptied in seconds, the sound of expensive shoes echoing down the corridor, leaving only Daniel and Carter in the hollow silence of the boardroom. The contracts lay untouched on the table, useless paper in the shadow of scandal. Daniel slammed his fist against the table. No, this was supposed to be mine. Carter rubbed his forehead, his composure gone. "They have evidence, Daniel. This isn't rumor. Someone's fed the press your entire trail. Transfers, spyware, stolen research, it's all there." Daniel turned to him, his eyes blazing. "Then find out who leaked it. Fix it." But Carter didn't move. For the first time, the lawyer who had spoken with such confidence looked beaten. "There's nothing to fix. Once the media has it, once regulators are watching, this is finished. Daniel sank back in his chair, his chest heaving, his tie, a skew sweat beading on his forehead. For the first time since I had known him, the mask was gone. What sat before them now was not a visionary CEO or a charming husband. It was a desperate man watching his empire collapse in real time. And though I wasn't in that boardroom, I didn't need to be. I had set the truth in motion, and now the world was carrying it forward. While Daniel's voice broke against the empty walls, the truth roared louder than he ever could. His name, once polished and ambitious, was now shackled to fraud, to betrayal, to the scandal of a man who thought he could cheat both family and fate. The silence that followed was his true verdict. Not the strike of a gavel, but the sound of doors closing behind men who would never shake his hand again. The boardroom that had buzzed with anticipation minutes earlier now echoed with nothing but the scrape of chairs and the soft thud of polished shoes walking away. No shouting, no dramatic gestures, just the cold efficiency of investors who had already decided Daniel Mercer was no longer worth their time. He sat frozen at the head of the table, eyes wide but unfocused, staring at contracts that no longer mattered. His hand still rested on a pen he hadn't used, his knuckles white, his grip trembling. The predators he thought he could charm had turned on him without a word, and the silence cut deeper than any insult could. Carter Doyle sat beside him, his head bowed, face pale. His leather briefcase lay open, the neat stacks of contracts, inside useless, now reduced to scraps of paper with no buyer left to sign them. He rubbed his temples, avoiding Daniel's gaze. For all his polish and careful calculation, even Carter understood the truth. No legal strategy could stitch together a reputation once it had been shredded in public view. Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice raw. "They can't do this. Not over rumors," but the words rang hollow even to himself. His phone still buzzed on the table, headline after headline flashing across the screen. Mercer under federal scrutiny. SEC confirms review of fraudulent transfers. Sources point to stolen research. The notifications piled up relentless, each one driving the reality deeper. Carter didn't look up. It's not rumors. It's evidence. Whoever leaked this had the whole chain financials data, even your voice on video. Daniel slammed his fist against the table, the sound sharp in the empty room. She did this. Hannah, that old woman and her games. Carter sighed, his tone weary. "Blame whoever you want, Daniel, but it doesn't matter. This is over. The contracts, the investors, Mercer Innovations, it's all gone." Daniel's eyes darted around the empty boardroom, searching for something solid, something left to hold on to. But the polished walls reflected only his own broken expression back at him. The room that was supposed to mark his triumph now stood as a tomb for his ambition. For the first time, he looked small, no longer the smooth-talking CEO or the confident husband who had convinced my daughter to stand against me. He was stripped down to what he truly was, a predator who had overreached, caught in the act with no escape left. The silence stretched on. Daniel's breath grew shallow, uneven, his bravado collapsing. "I had it," he whispered, as if speaking to himself. "I was so close." Carter closed his briefcase slowly, the click of the latch echoing like a final verdict. "Close doesn't matter anymore. What matters is they'll come for you now, the regulators, the press, and when they do, I won't be able to shield you." Daniel turned to him sharply, desperation flaring. "You're supposed to protect me. That's your job." Carter met his eyes for the first time, and in that look was resignation. My job was to protect the company, but there's nothing left to protect. Not after this. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his body slack as though the fight had drained out of him. His eyes, once sharp with calculation, now stared blankly at the ceiling. He looked like a man already defeated, drowning in silence. And that was the truth. Predators rarely fall with explosions or fire. More often, they crumble in quiet rooms when the weight of their own lies becomes unbearable. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. I knew exactly how it unfolded, because men like Daniel always end the same way. The power they flaunt dissolves, the allies they trust vanish, and what remains is nothing but the echo of their own arrogance. Daniel Mercer, who once thought he could control my daughter, my fortune, even my husband's legacy, now sat alone in the ruins of his ambition, and the silence that followed him was the sound of justice catching up at last. The boardroom emptied with no shouting, no slammed doors, only the sound of chairs sliding back and polished shoes moving briskly toward the exit. The investors did not argue or scold. They simply walked away, their silence sharper than any verdict. Daniel remained seated at the head of the table, his eyes hollow, staring at papers that no longer carried weight. The pen he had clutched so tightly rested unused beside the unsigned contracts. His triumph, which he had believed was only a signature away, had evaporated in a single afternoon. Beside him, Carter Doyle kept his head bowed, his once confident posture reduced to slumped shoulders. His leather briefcase sat half open, its neat rows of documents now meaningless. He avoided Daniel's gaze, knowing that no courtroom maneuver could rescue them. The headlines had already buried their reputations. For Daniel, the silence was unbearable. He muttered, voice hoarse, "It's not real. This can't be happening," but it was. Mercer Innovations collapsed within days, its accounts frozen, its offices raided. The company Daniel had paraded as his empire became nothing more than a cautionary tale. Federal investigators circled regulators, prepared charges, and the empire he built on deceit dissolved like ash in rain. I was not there to witness his fall. I didn't need to be. Men like Daniel always crumble in the same way, quietly stripped of applause, abandoned by those who once praised them. Instead, I stood with Emily in a very different room, a conference hall inside a university campus in Geneva, where the International Cyber Ethics Council convened. The panel of experts sat across from us, serious but respectful. In my hands was a drive, the culmination of Richard's final work, the real Project Keystone. I placed it on the table and spoke with steady conviction. This was never meant for profit. It was meant for protection. Today I entrust it to this council for safekeeping, so it can serve the world rather than be exploited. Emily sat beside me, her presence firm and quiet. She said nothing at first, only watched as the panel accepted the files with solemn care. There were no cameras, no contracts, promising millions, no empty smiles, only responsibility. And in that silence, I felt Richard's presence again, his legacy, finally shielded from greed. When the meeting concluded, Emily and I stepped out into the late afternoon light. The university courtyard stretched wide, filled with students walking in pairs, their voices full of life and ambition. Emily slipped her hand into mine as we walked down the stone path. She broke the silence first, her voice soft, trembling but sure. "I was wrong, Mom. About him, about everything." I squeezed her hand. "No, you weren't wrong. You just loved, and love makes us trust where we shouldn't. But now you've grown. That's what matters." She stopped walking, turning to face me, her eyes glistening. I thought I was protecting him, but I was blind. "And you? You were protecting me the whole time." I smiled faintly, shaking my head. "I was protecting Richard's legacy. The rest you learned on your own. That's what makes you stronger now." We continued walking, not speaking of money or technology, but of the future. A future where silence had shielded us, where restraint had proven more powerful than rage. The $3 million inheritance remained untouched, a secret that had saved us, but now it felt less like armor and more like a reminder. Wealth meant nothing if it was not safeguarded by wisdom. As we passed beneath the arches of the campus, the evening sun cast long shadows across the stones. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace. Emily's steps were steady beside mine, no longer uncertain, no longer divided. She had seen Daniel for what he was, and she had chosen to walk forward with me. The predator had fallen. His silence now belonged to shame. Ours belonged to freedom.